Hello and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Jahnke. Today we're going to be talking about second round fantasy football draft strategy. We are getting closer and closer to the season, so I'm going to go through all of the scenarios on what you should do in the second round, depending on what you did in the first round. But before we jump into second round draft strategy, I want to remind you again to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That is the best way that you can help support us, and that also helps make sure that you do not miss an episode from John or I. I also want to remind you that we do have the PFF early bird special going on. It goes until August 18th. For a limited time offer, new subscribers can save $20 on an annual PFF Plus subscription, bringing the price down to $99.99. That's what gets you access to all of my fantasy football rankings, all of John's IDP rankings, all of my draft content, all of John's draft content, and then once the season starts, all of the waiver wire and start sit information that you need to help your fantasy football win each and every week. So that is the PFF early bird special that ends August 18th. Go to subscribe.pff.com and use code earlybird. You'll also be able to find the link on social media, on the website in general. So that'll be a big help for you this fantasy season to help you win your league. Now to jump into second round fantasy football draft strategy, the first thing that you should consider is if Brian Thomas Jr. is available, I would draft him regardless of what you did in round one. If you picked a wide receiver, if you picked a running back, you want to get Brian Thomas Jr. I can forgive you for not picking him in the first round if he falls to you in the second round and you pick him up there. I have him ranked as my third wide receiver, so I think he is a huge value in the second round. His ADP, regardless of where you look, is consistently in that early second round range. So I think he's even a value late in the first round. I think he has a lot of potential in Liam Cohen's offense. I think Cohen's offense will do a lot to help Trevor Lawrence lower his average depth of target, make him throw more accurate passes to the shorter passes, which is where he has shined in the past. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is also going to line up in the slot a lot, and he had the most yards per route run among all slot receivers last year. And we've seen Cohen slot receivers thrive in fantasy, whether it was Chris Godwin last year, Cooper Kupp a couple years ago. So regardless of what you do in round one, Brian Thomas Jr. is the guy you want to start round two if you have one of those first few picks and he's on the board. The second thing that I would consider if you are picking early in round two is you want to at least consider Brock Bowers, and that's because it's generally nice to have either an elite fantasy quarterback or an elite fantasy tight end. If you don't draft either one of those, then you have to draft multiple quarterbacks later, multiple tight ends later. You'll have to make start-sit decisions at both of those positions each week, and I would much rather draft at least an elite tight end or an elite quarterback. So those late rounds, you can take more dart throws at running back and more dart throws at wide receiver. So in order to get an elite tight end, if you're picking with the 12th overall pick in the first round, the 11th overall pick in the first round, this is really your only opportunity to get an elite tight end because Brock Bowers has an ADP typically in the middle of the second round, Trey McBride early in the third round, George Kittle mid to late third round. So if you don't pick a tight end here, none of those three tight ends are going to be available for you once you're picking in the third round. And similarly at quarterback, a lot of the elite quarterbacks will be off the board. A chance Jalen Hurts is available there, but if you don't draft an elite tight end at this pick, then you might miss out on both having an elite tight end and an elite quarterback. This might be something that you're okay with, in which case we can move on to the next draft strategy. But I want to make sure that you know that if you want one of those elite players, the second round is the time to do it for those picking around 11 or 12, because if not, you'll miss out. After that, it's really about who falls to the second round out of the first round. We have a clear top 6 players by ADP across the board, sometimes in a slightly different order, but Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Justin Jefferson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and CeeDee Lamb. Very often the top 6 players by ADP, maybe one of them falls to the 7th or 8th pick, but those 6 players are definitely going to be off the board by the time you reach the second round. After that, there's 9 different players with an ADP from 9.5 to 16.6. So they're pretty well bunched together, and at least some of these players will consistently fall to the second round, a minimum of 3 of them. A chance there's more if there's a reach in the first round. but they're all wide receivers and running backs. The wide receivers, Brian Thomas Jr., who we already covered, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Malik Neighbors. And at running back, it's Christian McCaffrey, Ashton Jeanty, Devin Achane, and Derrick Henry. So a lot of the options, if you don't want Brock Bowers, are either at running back or wide receiver if you're picking in that first half of the second round. And the players that I really would want to target out of the group is Puka Nacua or Nico Collins at wide receiver. Both of these wide receivers have had elite PFF receiving grades these last couple seasons, also elite in terms of yards per route run. Both of them have dealt with injuries, which has hurt their total fantasy production. But in terms of their fantasy production per game, they are right up there with the elite wide receivers in the league. So generally, if you can't get Brian Thomas Jr. and you're looking for a wide receiver, I would get one of them. At running back, it's really only Christian McCaffrey and Ashton Jeanty that I would consider in this range. Christian McCaffrey, his ADP has been increasing and getting earlier, slowly but surely. So it's becoming less and less likely that McCaffrey will be available in this range. But if Ashton Jeanty is there, I think he will have an excellent rookie season. So part of it depends on what you want your build to be. Often if I'm picking in the late half of the first round, I'm picking wide receiver, but I am fine going wide receiver, and focusing running backs a couple rounds after, or a wide receiver running back start is also perfectly fine. So often if I have the 7th, 8th, 9th pick in the first round, I'm ending up with these wide receiver builds. Often a Brian Thomas Jr. and Puka Nacua, Brian Thomas Jr. and Nico Collins. I'm very happy with either one of those. So I think that's great if you have one of those first 5 or so picks in the second round. After that, there is another gap in ADP. There's no one with a consensus ADP at 17 or 18. So there's a bunch of players between 19.9 and to the end of the second round or so. It's a mix of players across various positions. So a lot of players that you can consider, but I really boil it down to 2 or 3 players that I would really consider if you have the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, even 10th, 11th picks in the second round. So ADP wise, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are typically picked in this range, but I'm perfectly fine waiting at least one more round at quarterback, because if I'm picking a quarterback early, I want Jaden Daniels, and he is available in the third round. So I am passing on Allen and Jackson in the first round. Similarly, we talked about Brock Bowers. This is where his ADP typically falls. But if you are picking in the middle of the second round or late parts of the second round, then you can get a Trey McBride or George Kittle later. And I don't think there's a huge gap between them. So I'm either picking Bowers early in the second round or I'm passing on him altogether. So that really leaves, again, running back or wide receiver as your options here. At running back, it's Bucky Irving, Josh Jacobs, or Jonathan Taylor. And at wide receiver, it's Drake London and A.J. Brown. Irving is the only one of the 3 players that I just listed that I think is a value at running back. I think he is going to have an excellent season. I'm not worried about Rachaad White. We saw Bucky Irving's playing time increase even further the last week of the regular season and in the playoffs. So easy for fantasy managers to remember that, or easy for them to forget that, because the fantasy season was over at that point, but he was playing close to 100% of snaps on early downs, on short yarded situations, and on goal line situations. So this is the similar role to what we see from Derrick Henry. And Irving has graded excellent at receiver. So there's a chance he starts taking some of those 2-minute drill snaps, some of those third down snaps, in which case he would have an even larger role than someone like Derrick Henry, and similar to a lot of these other elite running backs. So I don't think the role is the problem. I think he graded very well as both a runner and as a receiver. So I think in terms of his talent, he fits there with these elite running backs. He is near perfect in a lot of different situations. The Buccaneers have a good offensive line, a lot of continuity on the offensive line as well, which will certainly help. So I am perfectly happy to draft Irving without any reservations, not concerned about Rachaad White or anyone else in this backfield. And then the 2 wide receivers I mentioned, Drake London and A.J. Brown, I think both of them are great values here in the mid to late parts of the second round. Drake London, he stepped up in a big way last year, showed he has a lot of chemistry with Michael Penix in the 3 games together, and I think London will just continue to be one of those clear-cut top 10 fantasy wide receivers. And A.J. Brown, we know exactly who he is as well. We know he is an elite talent, probably a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL talent-wise. Just held back from the Philadelphia Eagles run-first offense with Saquon Barkley there, a team that's often winning games, so they don't have to pass as much. And they also have other options they can pass to, so that sometimes hurts Brown's fantasy value, but he is still a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. When you're debating between Irving and either London or Brown, a lot of it can come down to what you did in the first round. I'm pretty happy at this point to have a balanced running back wide receiver start. So if you had one of those early picks where you picked Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs, happy to pivot to a wide receiver here. Or if you drafted one of the wide receivers early, I'm happy to pivot to Bucky Irving here. The last part of the draft strategy is probably the very end of the second round, and that's when I am switching probably to Trey McBride. As I was talking about earlier with Brock Bowers, it's advantageous to have either an elite tight end or an elite quarterback. And I want to get McBride here because there's a chance if I don't get McBride in the second round, he might not be there in the third round, where whatever other position I want to draft with that late second round, early third round pick, there's probably multiple options available. At quarterback, Jaden Daniels is typically available in the middle of the third round, so perfectly happy to get him early third round. And if Daniels does end up getting drafted earlier than expected, that typically means Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson fell. So you're able to get a quarterback if you want to. I think guys like Chase Brown and Kyron Williams, typically early to mid third round picks by ADP. I think they are perfectly fine picks at the start of the third round. T. Higgins, another one at wide receiver, I think is a great early third round pick. So while some of them can sometimes get picked in the second round, you can typically find guys at those positions that you like at the start of the third round, even if your top guy isn't there, where if Trey McBride is picked and you can't get him in the early third round, then it's a little early to get George Kittle. So you're probably stuck getting another running back and wide receiver and waiting a long time for a tight end. So that's going to cover it for my second round fantasy football draft strategy. If you missed the first round draft strategy, that video went up and video went up a week ago. So definitely check that out as well. Hopefully that helps you at the start of your fantasy football drafts. If you want help with the third rounds and beyond, you can find plenty of articles up on PFF.com right now, going through the perfect fantasy football draft strategy, whether it's for a 12-team league, a 10-team league, even 14 or 18 leagues, and then also going through different sites, different specific pick numbers. So we have all of that on PFF.com right now to help you with your fantasy football drafts, as well as the rankings, as well as sleeper articles, league winner articles, and those kind of things. So definitely check that out. And the way that you get access to that is with a PFF Plus subscription. So a reminder again on the early bird special where you can save $20 on an annual PFF subscription for new subscribers. And again, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, that definitely helps us out and helps you as well. So hopefully you're enjoying the preseason games. Hopefully you're enjoying your fantasy football drafts. And until next time, peace out.